Now I'm recording my end. Boom, boom, boom.
Recording your end. That sounds fun.
Doesn't it? You can't see the other microphone. In episode 117, we welcome the founders of the Circumstance Distillery, Danny Walker and Liam Hirt, to talk about their Circumstantial Grain Spirits, which isn't a whiskey, and the reasons why are amazing, so keep listening.
Absolutely. This is genuinely one of my favourite interviews we've ever done. These guys are good people. Good people. We talk about a number of things, including this wonderful thing called Still in Cask, which you definitely want to know more about.
Why not head over to our social media accounts? What else you got to do? At Whisky and Things Podcast on Instagram and at Whisky and Things on Facebook and Twitter.
Absolutely. And give us a review, just like Derek has. You'll find out more later.
Foreshadowing.
You're listening to Whisky and Things with Nick Kent and Dave Giles.
Welcome to episode 117. I'm Dave Giles.
And I'm Nicholas Anthony Kent. Full naming it, Dave.
How you doing, buddy?
Felt like it. I'm okay, thank you very much. I've finished both our samples, and I feel bad because we just had a wicked interview, and I've finished both of mine. I don't feel bad because they weren't good. Kind of the opposite. I kind of feel bad that I've done mine and you haven't finished yours.
No, I haven't, because I thought we would then score them.
Yeah, I know.
And now we can't.
We can maybe score.
No,
it.
we can't. Not if you're not.
I forgot, ladies and gentlemen. I forgot we were going to score it afterwards. We'll have to get a bottle, Dave. We'll split a bottle.
We will at some point in future. We'll get a bottle, I'm sure. But you jumped the gun massively here. You've just gone straight into your own disappointment. You haven't asked me about my holiday. You haven't asked that. It's fine. It's fine, Nick. It's fine. Shall we just get on with it then?
No, let's backtrack. Let's talk about your holiday, Dave.
No, it's fine.
No. I want to know. I know the people want to know. He went to the Isle of Skye, everyone.
I did. I visited the 2 distilleries on the island.
Yeah.
And on the way back, went to another distillery. We can talk about them another time. We've got more whiskey to drink, mate. It's a good thing. It doesn't matter. Let's crack on with the show.
All right. We'll talk about that. We'll do a normal episode next week. And we'll do any other business. And we'll go, okay,
maybe
Dave,
I've got any other business this week as well, mate. It's fine. Doesn't matter. We'll talk about your disappointment that you've drunk your samples. It's fine.
I wasn't disappointed.
Anyway, this week we have talked...
Who did we talk to, Dave?
We talked to Danny and Liam, who are the co-founders of the Circumstance Distillery in Bristol. And this genuinely was one of my favourite interviews we've ever done. I had a great time listening to these two and talking to them. I love their ethics and what they're doing. So,
yeah,
Nick, roll the tape.
Don't have tape. Liam, Danny, welcome to the Whisky and Things podcast. How are you both doing today?
Yeah, very good, thank you.
Yeah, very well, thanks.
Have I got this right, Danny? Are you in New Zealand right now, or has Nick misinformed me?
No, I am. I'm in New Zealand, in Wellington.
Oh, it's one of my favourite cities in the world.
Yeah, like Wellington.
I love Wellington a lot. I was listening to 4 Seasons in One Day by Crowded House last week, which is apparently written about Wellington. Did you know that, Nicholas?
No, I didn't.
It's a great song.
Yeah. And we do get those in most days. So yes, yeah. I mean, there was a point yesterday where the water, just walking down the street, was up to my ankles, and about 7 minutes later, it was gloriously sunny. So it is. Wellington is very much a chaotic weather place.
Yeah, and I just got back from the Isle of Skye, which is obviously up in Scotland in the Highlands, and it's very similar up there. So I kind of feel an affinity with New Zealand and Scotland. I think there's a massive connection there, and obviously here we are talking about whiskey, which is good. I like it. Anyway, I've massively hijacked the start of this, Nick.
It's called conversation, Dave. It's fine. I applaud that for a podcast, to be honest.
Oh, well, I try.
Yeah. Let's start with your whiskey origin stories.
Oh, nice.
Let's start with Danny, as it's alphabetical. Let's start with that. I don't know how competitive you both are, so let's go alphabetical. Tell us about your whiskey origin story. How you loved how you became in love with the spirit, and how you got to where you are today, starting a distillery.
Yeah, sure. So my first sort of foray into whiskey was starting out as a bartender. So I spent nearly 20 years making drinks for a living, and sort of fell in love with whiskey through mixing with it, and that started with American, as a lot of sort of more classic cocktails have got a real good American whiskey base, so got heavily into bourbons and ryes, and then sort of drifted from there into the glorious joys of Scotch, and I guess like a lot of people find Scotch, started with some of the sweeter end and lighter end, and then suddenly became hooked on peat, and sort of ventured heavily in there before looping full circle and coming back into the lighter, more nuanced stuff. But yeah, spent years mixing cocktails with it and drinking it, and then we decided to start making it, which was the sort of the bigger step in the adventure, and I guess that's a much longer and more complicated story, but obviously I don't want to steal all of Liam's material either. But we started out with gin, so we started distilling. I never initially quoted the date. I always just worked it backwards in years, and it's just getting longer and longer and harder to remember. But I think it was about 15 years ago. Or somewhere in that, maybe less than that. Was it 12? Somewhere it was around 12 years ago. I think we started out as hobby distillers, just playing around on homemade stills that Liam made out of pressure cookers, and we started playing around with some real sort of early stage development to start making gin initially, based on the fact that was the easier thing to produce, and the more. There's something we could play around with a lot more in sort of tiny little homemade stills. That then developed into a gin distillery, which initially started out as a side hustle on the side of some other fun stuff. But then as that grew and developed into an actual functional business, we realized we were on a trajectory to create something really exciting, which meant we could eventually put in some really big toys and start making whiskey. And so it was never, and Liam may disagree, but certainly from mine, it was never an intention to start a whiskey distillery. It was a hobby that just grew and got to a point, and everything just got to a point. It's like, wow, we actually could. Holy shit, we could actually make whiskey. And then it just steamrolled and got to a point where we were playing around again to restart this process and start again from scratch, really, and start with new learnings and new understandings of coming straight from ferment through into distillate, and putting in some really grown up pieces of kit into a big old warehouse space, and got us to whiskey, which was was about to get us to whiskey, which is
yes.
Exciting.
We'll come on to.
Yeah.
We have whiskey now, don't we, actually? The casks are going past the 3-year mark. So there's a few casks in the distillery now that are whiskey.
Exciting.
Congratulations.
Oddly, one of them is corn whiskey, which I didn't even know was there. And we've also got an oat whiskey, which again, I didn't know was there, but it was a good idea at the time.
Liam, how did you get into whiskey? What was your story?
It was a kind of a convoluted route. I was trained as a doctor, and I worked as a cardiologist for many years. But I kind of worked my way through medical school in bars and restaurants in London. And then when I qualified, I opened a bar with Danny. And that was kind of where we met. And then we kind of did our separate things for a while. And then came back together when we started distilling. But I think it was, to start with, in my kind of drinking career, I was never really that into whiskey in my younger years. It was always a bit of a kind of an old man's drink in many respects for me. And then it was when we had the bar together, I really got into Scotches, and particularly the Islays, and that was my kind of entry drug. And from there, it just kind of, there was a whole world of whiskey out there, and it was quite a nice time because the world of whiskey was opening up at that time as well. So we started getting some, New Zealand whiskies, Australian whiskies, Macmillan, Sweden. So the whiskey world was getting bigger and bigger and much more interesting to explore. And as Danny said, we started off with our little gin distillery, messing about with stills in my basement. And we got to the point where we hadn't finished with gin, and we still haven't. We still love doing the gins that we do, but there was certainly scope to do more. And our head distiller is Mark Scott, and he was super into whiskey, and it was kind of ended up being a collective decision that we'd look into that as our next project. And we weren't just going to do it for the sake of doing it. We had to add something. And it became quite clear that we could. And Mark was very clear what he wanted to achieve. And we were very clear that was definitely going to be adding something to the category. So that's when we started really pushing forward. Yeah, and I was surprised, as Danny was, that we ended up there. And probably more surprised than Danny that we actually pulled it off.
Love that.
You're really into your green credentials. Let's start there. Because did you kind of start off with the idea of being environmentally friendly with your process, or did that come in later on?
Yeah, it was kind of there from the outset.
Right.
We've always used organic grains from the outset, and that was something that was very important to us. We weren't carbon neutral to start with, but we were always very conscious about what we were using and how we were using things. And then over the last year or so, we settled down in terms of a business and in terms of a distillery. We knew what we were doing. We'd overcome all of the normal operational problems that we were going to encounter. And at that point, we could then take a look at, right, now, how do we cut our waste? How do we do this? Now that we know exactly what we're doing, how do we do it better? So we're 4 years old. And over the last 12, 24 months, that's been our real focus. And we've got to be carbon neutral. We're fully organic, Soil Association certified.
So we certainly started with the low hanging fruit, with the stuff that seemed to make sense, that followed through from our own lives anyway, and from our own, always being, quite key on recycling and waste reduction and things in our own lives. And that then fed through into the distilleries, so that all of the grain waste went off to pig farms. All of the botanical waste always went off to make biofuel. And we always tried to reduce waste where we could, and partly through wanting to reduce waste, and partly through cost management. We were taking cuts off the distillation run. We were taking heads cuts off the gin stills to start making interesting twists on liqueurs and things that we could then utilize in the distillery when mixing cocktails. So again, just trying to utilize our own waste as much as we could to tie everything in. And certainly using organic was always really important to us, even when it didn't have any close to an impact on some of the flavor. Things like neutral grain alcohol utilizing for making gin, using the organic, there is zero difference whatsoever in the finished liquid of the gin. But what it does for biodiversity was important enough for us to make that decision to pay the bit extra for it. So we started off with the stuff that made sense to us straight out the gate, and then as Liam said, in the last year or two, we've then really started to focus on it. So rather than just doing it because it felt right, or doing it because we knew how to do it, we've now started to question each thing that we implement in the business. Like, how do we make that better? How do we make less impact, and how do we have a more positive impact on the world and on the community with each thing that we bring in, be that packaging or product sourcing or production methods. Early on, all of our gin stills were cooled with closed systems to reduce water waste. So we had multiple water tanks cycling water around to make sure we weren't just pouring water down the drain for the sake of cooling. We managed to get some good heat transfer in the through the cooling on the whiskey stills to charge the fermentation, which is a great way of saving energy and keeping stuff in a loop, which again comes down partly down to a financial cost, financial decision, but largely down to reducing our impact.
Whiskey
So I'm looking at the website now, and it seems obviously we've got this proper whiskey release. Proper whiskey. That's such a whiskey.
That's arbitrary. That's really
a whiskey coming out in September, which will be your first whiskey release. But I can see you're selling corn spirit, mixed grain, and a rice spirit. That's rice, not rye. For those of you who may have misheard me there. Why those, and what are they all about? And I see there's quite a long fermentation process on those as well, which is interesting.
Yeah, I'll start with that actually, with the fermentation. That's as I was saying, that's one of the areas where we felt we could add to whiskey as a category. Traditionally, fermentations for whiskey are something like 36 hours. With a super strong, muscly yeast that does its job, converts all the sugar, and it's done relatively quickly. The industry was moving, in part, some of the new distilleries were starting to use longer fermentations, what they term long fermentations, which were 4 to 5 days. And they were producing some excellent whiskey and some excellent new make. And that was kind of our inspiration, was okay, 4 or 5 days still isn't that long. So what happens if we take that fermentation out further? Do we build more flavour? We were sure we were going to build more flavour. And when we started fermenting for 14 days, sometimes it was up to kind of 16 days, that's what we got. We got bags and bags and layers of flavour. So all of our spirits are fermented for about that long.
That's madness.
It's very expensive. It's a really expensive way of doing it.
Right. It's a lot of real estate been taken up for a long time.
If you're setting up a distillery, I would not recommend doing it that way if you want to make any money whatsoever.
And well, that's funny you should say that, because the price of those bottles isn't actually that much. £36 on the website each for those, which is really low for something that's taken that long to obviously there's time in a barrel with those as well. So actually your product is reasonably priced despite this long, expensive process. We're new, and we know what we can do, but we're still slightly unproven. Right.
And really, we want to show as many people as possible what we can turn out. And the best way of doing that is by doing these kind of things and keeping it accessible.
Tell you what, Dave, I'm a bit thirsty. Are you a bit thirsty?
Well, I was just thinking the same.
Yeah.
Is that a cue to try one of these then, Dick?
Well, we might as well just open one up and just have a little sip.
Have I been drinking then?
I didn't notice that.
It's 7:30. I mean, come on. Right, you've been kind enough to send us a couple of samples, but the spirit we've been sent is your corn whiskey. So let's have a little pour of this. You want to tell us a bit about this one? Your circumstantial corn.
Do you remember this?
I certainly remember. I remember distilling it, and I remember laying it down. But you guys are at a slight advantage to me because we couldn't get samples out to New Zealand in time. So I've not tasted this liquid.
Wow.
So yeah, you're sat drinking a dram that I've not had the privilege of trying it at this age. I tried it. As it's been getting there, and I'm on a plane in August to come back to get a load of it into my suitcase. But for now, I've not tried it, so I will pass it over to you guys for tasting it.
Okay, so the mash bill for this one is 70% torrefied corn and 30% malted barley. We pretty much have to include some malted barley in all of our mash bills, no matter what we're making, because of the enzymes. Otherwise, we'd likely end up adding enzymes, which we don't particularly want to do. We'd rather do it naturally. So a bit of malted barley. And in this one, it's 30%. This fermentation was 12 days as opposed to the 14. And it's a part of what we do with our fermentations is we make them long, but we use slightly unusual yeasts. And in this case, it was a mead yeast with a little bit of distiller's yeast as well. And it's another aspect of our fermentation which has been growing in popularity using these different yeasts. But the appreciation of how much a yeast adds to the flavour of the final product, even when it's 5 or 10 years old, is I think slightly underappreciated, because I think it does make a big difference. So this one was fermented on a mead yeast with a little bit of distiller's yeast. Like I said, 12 days. And then we distilled it through our 1,800 litre pot still with a four plate copper column. And that was our new make. Do you remember the new make when it came out, Danny?
Oh yeah, super. Look, and it's going to sound bad, but super corny. It almost threw us slightly.
Clever.
Yeah, I know. And as I said initially, a lot of my route in my early days was drinking a lot of American whiskies, and obviously that big corn focus. And I was expecting something a little sweeter straight out the gate, but what that new make just tasted like cornflakes. It was madness. We just got so much grain note from the corn, and then that sweetness picked up and almost started to cut into sort of banana-y notes and real sort of interesting fruit notes that started to kick through that grain note as it got to a few months, and then I stopped spending time with it. So I don't know how it's grown.
Forgive me if I missed this, but what has it been matured in so far?
Yeah, I was just going to tell you that. It was this one actually never saw a cask at all. So we aged this on charred wood spindles. So it's essentially a stick that's had grooves cut in it all the way down, which is then toasted and charred. And in this case, it had a number of different woods. There was some English chestnut. There was some cherry wood. I think there was some hickory. And some maple. So it's had a lot of different woods on this.
So what's the container that's in then? Are the spindles in something?
It's in an inert container, yeah. So it was in a kind of HDP plastic barrel, essentially, with the spindles inside.
Is that one of the reasons why you can't call this a whiskey, like a corn whiskey, because it has been aged in a barrel? What's the...
Yeah, there's lots of reasons. They're
so far away. It's so far. It is so. I mean, you've got some in your glass and in your mouth, and it is whiskey, but it is also so far away from whiskey from every legal definition of the word.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah, it's not 3 years old. There's I think there's stuff in here that's younger than 3 years old. Although the average is 3 years. Some of it's younger.
Yeah.
And obviously not aged in cask. Yeah. So we were never intending to make a whiskey with this.
Where was the inspiration for this process to spindle in? Is that, I've never heard of that done before. Have you picked that up from someone else? Is it a borrowed idea, or is this something completely original to you guys?
I'm going to say completely original. And then I'm going to feel guilty.
It's not.
And tell the truth.
I'd say it's an evolved idea. So it's not a completely original idea. It has been used in the wine industry. Right. Things like oak chips and things have been used in the cheaper end of the wine industry, and then it's been evolved in some distilleries, particularly in the American craft end, have started to use things of that nature, and certainly even things like the additions of staves into barrels to start adding extra wood surface contact. So it's not completely original, but the way that we approached it and developed it became pretty original and pretty unique. I think one of the angles that we went down was trying to utilize some English oak.
That was the kind of driver for it, really, wasn't it?
Yeah, and English oak, American oak and European oak, tall, true, big, strong trees, really easy to make barrel staves out of. English oak trees, gnarly, knotted, bendy, quite difficult to make staves out of for barrels, which meant that the English oak casks don't really become a thing. I know there is some, but they're pretty rare and they're obscenely expensive. And so we worked with a local wood expert who got really into it, and we had some really good meetings with her, and she got really into the different genuses of wood and working on finding the right wood, and then working on maximizing that surface area. Once we maximized that surface area, we then got into a bunch of testing around baking the wood at certain temperatures for certain lengths of time to release different sugar compounds and flavor profiles, and then into charring. So straight from the actual wood source, the shape, the bake temperature, bake time, and then char levels. And we had a whole wealth of experimenting going on to get to this point of maximizing the flavor from that wood into the liquid. It got geeky for a while, but it was a lot of it was a lot of fun.
Obviously, with the barrel, with the kind of pressure and moisture and heat fluctuations, kind of drawing it in and out of the wood. How does that work with these staves? Is it more or less the same thing, or did you have to fluctuate the heat or the moisture yourself? How does that work in terms of maturation time?
So we'd get natural heat fluctuations in the liquid in the storage as you would in a cask warehouse. The fluctuations are going to be less because the wood is immersed into the liquid, and you get larger fluctuations from the outside of the wood because obviously the ambient temperature changes quicker than the liquid temperature will. So there is a small amount of fluctuation, but because there is a massive amount of surface area, because it is young, fresh wood, so it's not this is not like an old cask that's seen 5 iterations. This is brand new wood, brand new fresh char, brand new roasting. Means that it doesn't need that fluctuation in the heat for the flavor to really start to jump out there. We could, over time, if we use these many times over, eventually we would have to start intervening in temperature to extract more flavor. But because a small piece of wood is imparting a huge amount of flavor, we just utilize new wood. So it's a super generous process. It gives so much flavor in such a short amount of time that actually trying to expedite that process anymore is unnecessary.
The bit of the aging process that we were concerned about was the oxidation. So you would normally in a cask get oxidation happening through the wood, but because our spirit was encased in plastic, essentially, there was no opportunity for that. So we left them open, essentially. So the top of the barrels was left open with the wood staves in to achieve that oxygenation at the top of the barrel.
Right.
So does that mean you had a higher angel share?
Yeah, I was about to ask that.
Yes.
Yeah.
Because before you said that, I was thinking, one of the things that's probably beneficial to what you've done is no angel share. But then if you left them open,
you need that oxygenation as well as the wood contact.
No one ever talks about that.
You got to please those angels, though.
I've never heard anyone talk about that.
This is tax, isn't it?
Yeah. So it's the liquid breathing, essentially. And it's the difference between, and the addition of wood flavor is only one part of maturation. And all we've done with the spindles is add the flavor of wood. The maturation that occurs over time is as the liquid changes and evolves, is its contact with oxygen. It's some of the evaporation. So that angel share is never going to be. It's literally, an angel share is not going to be the same as just scooping a litre out. The liquid that's in that comes off. What's coming out is the more volatile components, the higher ester notes, the things that are leaving are specific, and the oxygen that's drawing in is changing part of the process and the structure and the texture of the liquid, and that can only happen over time. And so, this almost sped up aging or sped up addition of wood flavor isn't speeding up the actual maturation of the liquid. It's just increasing that wood contact. And so, it is that journey of age is not just one of the addition of wood.
I love all this. This is so extremely geeky, but so different from anything I've heard of that I'm absolutely engrossed in this story.
You're listening to Whisky and Things. These British people talk funny.
I don't know about you, Nick. This is really good.
It is really good.
This is really good.
It's very easy to drink.
Scarily easy to drink.
There's so many kind of lemony citrus notes on the nose first. It's absolutely gorgeous.
Yeah. Do you know, it may be just because I've been in Scotland, but I'm getting Iron Brew on the nose. And I'm not mad at that at all, because I've just gone through a whole bag of Iron Brew humbugs, which are amazing. So...
it's very sweet. So all those kind of sweet drinks or kind of candy flosses and all those kind of things, all of those kind of things are in the nose. So I just bring the Iron Brew. I think that's very good.
On the nose, this is exactly my favourite kind of drink, spirit drink. It's got all the candy sweets that I love. The foam bananas, all that kind of stuff is in there. And then you drink it and it's creamy. There's a creaminess to it, Nick. I don't know if you've picked up on that. I got a big...
Yeah, the mouthfeel. It's very easy
lovely,
to drink.
Creamy, sweet. It does... It does, on the aftertaste, it does feel a bit younger, but it is. But that doesn't offend me. But you can definitely tell it's a little bit younger than other things. But
it doesn't offend you because the new make, when it comes out, is exceptional. We should probably have sent you some of that as well.
Do you sell that as is?
No, we don't. Maybe we should. We certainly include it in kind of tasting packs and things. And when we do tastings, we love to bring it along because it's quite obvious that when you're starting with something that's that delicious, it's only kind of gets better. There's nothing that you're trying to hide or reduce by during the maturation.
Yeah, I'm just a big fan of this.
What was it? 36 quid? Was that right?
Yeah, exactly.
I love the fact you've gone somewhere completely different with it as well. The way you've aged it, you've not used casks, and you weren't like, but we can't do that because it won't be called a whiskey or whatever. And you've just gone, who cares? Let's just make it and just see what happens.
Can I ask?
So we're a big fan.
Can I ask what all the ratio numbers mean on the title? It says Circumstantial Corn 1:5:1:22:36, and your rice has a similar thing with 1:8:1:8:21. Yeah. What's that all about?
So that's for the geeks amongst us, and those numbers describe exactly how that spirit was made. So the first number is essentially the batch number, because all of the batches are unique. So number 1 was the first batch of corn that we did. Number 5 was the fermentation. So you can go and look all of these up on the website. And it'll tell you what each of the numbers mean. In this case, 5 describes the fermentation, which was the torrefied corn and the barley on mead yeast and distillers yeast. The third number 1, describes the distillation. So we can set up our still in a number of different ways. And in this case, it was set up as a pot still with a 4-plate copper column. So that's what that number means. 22 is the method of aging. So in this case, when you look it up on the website, you'll see 22 means the spindles, the various different wood spindles, and it lists them all. And then 36, the last number, is the average age of the liquid.
Right.
So in this case, it's 36 months. And that kind of gives a nice... or rather a full explanation of how the spirit was made. And it's there for anybody that's interested, but it's not kind of rammed down your throat if you just want to enjoy the liquid and not hear any more about it.
Yeah.
It was an intention to deliver the best of both worlds, and it was a fun solution that I think it was Liam that came up with it in the end, that we bounced around the houses wanting to try and, we love this sort of stripped back minimalism. The packaging is quite simple, quite straightforward. We don't want to provide any reading material with it. You don't need an essay in a box with your whiskey. But at the same time, we want complete transparency. So for those that just want to sit and have a dram and enjoy it, it's got a nice blast of colour on there. It tells you that it's corn. It tells you it's made by us, and that's it. Whereas if you want to dig a little deeper, open up that website, and we will literally tell you every single aspect down from the number of days of fermentation, the splits on the grains, the ferments, everything. And if there's anything on there that you can't find and anyone wants to know anything else, we will answer anything. We have absolute open book policy. We will tell you the weight of the grains. We will tell you the track time on the ferment. Literally, if you want to know, we are happy to share. And so, yeah, it was a balance of those two things.
I like that stuff. Very much like that stuff. Let's talk a bit more about the distillery. Based in Bristol. Where is it? Is it on a farm? Is it on an industrial estate?
Right
What's your setup? In the middle?
Yeah, right in the middle. So those of you who know Bristol, most people will come into Bristol on the M32. When you get to the centre of Bristol, bottom of the M32, you take a left and it's a couple of minutes off of that motorway. And yeah, it's on an industrial estate. We're in a 3,000 square foot industrial unit in an area of Bristol called Whitehall, which not many people know. Nice.
And you do tours down there, right? Is that right?
Absolutely not. No.
No tours.
Well, we do. We don't have scheduled tours because we're quite busy and it's an industrial space. It's very much a working space. But we'll certainly do tours for anyone that drops us an email and says, "Can I come in this Friday afternoon?" Absolutely, yeah. Come on in.
Love that. And we spoke to the guys at the East London Distilling Company. Have I got the name right, Nick?
Liquor Company, Dave.
Liquor Company. I got that wrong. I got that there wrong when I was there talking to them. And the sign was right there. It was on the bottle in front of me and I got it wrong. And he has a similar open book policy in terms of being so open about what's going in, because he says the thing is, anyone wants to try and recreate this using exactly the same ingredients and same wood or whatever you want to do, it's going to taste different because you're in a different place. If you're going to spend all the money to try and exactly recreate what we've done, that's a compliment to me, because that means you enjoy what we do, but it's still going to be different, which is a wonderful thing. There's no harm in being open about it, is there? It's not going to do you any harm unless you're doing something bad. That's
now something to be ashamed of.
Yeah, that's now how I see it. Like, anyway.
While we're talking about East London Liquor Company, they've recently introduced refilling bottles of liquor. You bring in your own bottle, and like a 70cl, and they will refill it with their gins and vodkas, etc. And you do the same type of thing, don't you?
Yeah. So the way we do that is, first of all, we have a refillery. Just obviously joke on distillery. You go to the distillery and use our refillery.
Round of applause.
Which says, you bring your bottle in and you can refill your bottle of gin or vodka or whatever. And the other thing that we do is we provide refills for your bottles at home by sending out aluminium cans with gin in, which is so much better environmentally than sending out bottles.
Ah. Is that going to be possible with whiskey at all? Or is it just the gins and vodkas that's legal with?
I don't know. We'll have to look into that. I mean, there are options, and there are kind of new things coming online all the time in terms of sustainable packaging. So we'll have to see how we're going to approach that. The thing is, I think most of what we release is going to be in batches. There isn't going to be a kind of a standard that you'll have, all year round, every year, that you could refill. Every one of them is going to be different. But yeah, certainly we need to think about the packaging and the sustainability of the packaging. Certainly you'll never see any fancy cardboard boxes around our bottles. We really hate those.
Yeah, Nick loves
them. They're complete waste. Complete waste. They wind me up. They're a complete waste of resources.
What, the tubes and cardboard boxes?
Oh, yeah. I think Glady have done away with them. Well, you can at least request not to have them.
Yeah, a few have done that, I think.
Yeah, we spoke to Nick Neen about that, and she said that they offered, because they're trying to do the whole sustainability thing, and that's core of what they're doing. And she said they put it on the website as an optional, you can ask for it. And she was quite disappointed how many people asked for it, which is quite frustrating.
So go one step further and don't offer it.
Just don't offer it, yeah. I agree with you.
If you're serious about it, don't offer it.
Completely agree.
I remember our head distiller Mark. He has probably the biggest bugbear around it, and his came from running a cocktail bar in Paris called Little Red Door, and they would receive from a couple of suppliers. They'd receive cases of whiskey, and for packaging purposes, they would send the case just in a 6 bottles in a box. Then they would send 6 of the presentation boxes flat packed in it for you to open up and pop the bottles in yourself. And it was like, what? And then literally it was a case of, okay, take those out, put those in the bin. And it was like, what an absolute colossal waste of time. And I get it for retail see it as added value and gifting and everything else, but it's just not what we're here for. We're here to make liquids. We've always been a liquid first distillery, and any decision we've ever made has been about the liquid in that bottle, and so there's the idea of making some nice fluffy packaging to make it look prettier doesn't really seem like a good use of time and money.
I even noticed that when you sent out the samples, actually the packaging is a lot less than some of the things we get sent. It was efficient and did the job, and things arrived safe still. We got sent a single sample bottle in a big presentation box recently that seems, and then on the back it reminded us to recycle all the different components of it, and which was fine. But just don't send the box then. Keeps him all. Anyway, that's me digressing massively. Obviously, we have this new whiskey coming out in September, and I feel like we should talk about that. We're gonna try it and do a little sample after we've done this episode, and that will go up for our Patreons if that's okay. So if you're interested in that, you know what to do. But also it will come out in September, so make sure
we'll do a proper feature on it then when it comes out, I reckon. Absolutely.
Great idea, Nick. Nick, that is a superb idea. One of your best.
New ideas, man.
Yes. The whiskey. While we're also talking about the East London Liquor Company, I think that's what they're called. They're recently part of this new thing, which is the English Whiskey Guild. Obviously, you must be aware of that. Is that something you're looking to get into, or were you exercised from that?
We were initially members of the English Whiskey Guild when it first started coming together, when we spent some time with a bunch of the other distilleries working on it. It was a really interesting project to start a geographical indicator for English whiskey. And we were really keen to continue with it. But as it's evolved and changed slightly, we feel it's maybe starting to stifle some innovation and maybe set up some barriers to entry into the industry, and maybe falling a little too close in line with things like the SWA and creating rules to basically make quite almost generic style or sort of just hamper that creativity and innovation. And so we're not currently members of the guild, and that's not to say that we won't join again in future. That's not to say that we won't work alongside them and with them to try and help create an amazing thing in the English whiskey world. But for the time being, no, we're not currently sat around that table.
Yeah, the SWA being the Scotch Whisky Association, I'm assuming.
Yeah,
right. So let's talk about this new whiskey you've got coming out in September. I have in front of me a sample, which, as I said, we might be using, which we were going to be talking about later for our Patreons. But is this sample in front of me what's coming out in September?
Yes. Yeah. So this was pulled out the casks a couple of months ago, I think. So we're probably, I think it's 3 or 4 months off of being whiskey. So yeah, it's a real sneak preview as to what's coming. So
now you're going to be official whiskey retailers, or that's not the right word. Whiskey distillers with a whiskey on the market. Is that exciting? Do you get a special certificate from someone for that, or is it just a pat on the back for yourselves, knowing you've done it?
It is a bucket list item for me, which I'm quite pleased about. It was always, on there as to make whiskey, and even though we've made lots of incredibly delicious liquids but to actually have one that says whiskey on it's going to be a nice little thing. But I think releasing a whiskey has similarities to buying a house, in that there's so many end dates. There's the we got the building, we got the stills, we did the first ferment, we did the first distillation, we put the first thing down, we tasted the first thing, we had the first release. There's been so many firsts, but this is the big one. This is the got keys, open the door. This is the big one. This is the it says, there's a bottle, it says whiskey on it, and so yeah, it's super exciting.
And you're not going to get any for ages.
I'm going to be there for that.
Oh, amazing!
It is only a short flight from New Zealand, and I'm not getting on it. I will be there. I'll be there very much for the launch. They're not releasing it without me.
It's still early in the journey, though. I think. I mean, we've been around for 4 years, which is nothing in the grand scheme of things. So we've actually got 3 mash bills that we work with.
Right.
So the first one is your kind of traditional barley. We don't actually make a single malt. So we use malted barley, but we also use a proportion of raw unmalted barley as well, which is kind of a nod to the Irish who use the unmalted barley.
Isn't it green barley?
Yeah. So nothing. We don't produce a single malt. So our first release, all of our releases are going to be single grain whiskies. So we've got the first mash bill, which is barley and unmalted barley. Our second mash bill, which is malted wheat with a touch of malted barley, and the third one is a rye whiskey, which is 51% rye, 49% malted barley. So this is the first of kind of 3 different styles of whiskey that'll all be released over the next kind of 12 to 18 months.
Nice,
amazing.
I think I know what the answer to this would be, but Was this the first thing that was distilled that was going to be whiskey, or was this, how many different barrels did you have going, and what one did you go, that's the one, it's the vatting of those two that we want to do? I mean, how did that process come about? Was it literally just like, that's the first one, it's going on sale, or was there other things in consideration here?
We have stuff that's 3 years old that we're not releasing. That's going to stay in barrel. We've decided that that's not going to be part of the first release. And as I said earlier, we've got some corn whiskey, which we're not releasing. There's no plans to release that. And the oat, we haven't tried that for a while. But the process of choosing which ones we were going to release was this really arduous, time-consuming process of tasting all of the casks on a kind of monthly basis. It was absolute torture.
Tough job. Someone's got to do it.
I know, exactly. I mean, there's got to be some perks to,
And there was some, and of course, at the same time as we like to play around and we like to have a lot of fun with the liquid, but there are still commercial considerations, and certainly commercial considerations went into the first release being a barley base, being the more understood end of the whiskey market in the UK, and so there's some of the stuff that we played with, like the corn that you just tasted. I mean, it's going to take. Someone told me, I said, explain this in one sentence. It's like, no, we need a book, just to go through the fermentations and the maturations and the distillation processes and the whys and the wherefores. Whereas, so starting with something that that is at least a little bit easier to understand. The fact that we're new, the fact that it's new, everything else being new, we didn't want to suddenly lead out and go, actually, we found this really rare historical grain called Emma, and that is the release of our first ever whiskey. It was just a step too far. So we did have to rein it in a little bit and release the barley out there first.
There's one other thing which I'm intrigued about, and this is the club you have. You have a club. What does that get you? How easy is it to get in? and does it cost anything? Tell us more about the club.
We have a club, which is called the Circ Club, and they're basically our best friends. So anyone who joins the club, there's 100 places, and anyone who joins the club, they're our best friends. We send them little bits. They get first dibs on anything that comes out. And we try to treat them really well. That's the good news. I think it was 25 quid a year or something. It wasn't so, extortionate. The bad news is that the club is full. There are no more places. We're running a waiting list so that as people don't renew their subscriptions, I can't believe that's going to happen, but it may. Then those spaces will be offered to the waiting list. So that's where we are with the club. If you do want the first release, it will go first to the club, so that'll be 100 bottles. And we'll go to people on our newsletter. So if you are interested in getting a bottle, you'll be second in line if you're on the newsletter. So get on the website, circumstance.com, join the newsletter, and at least you get a chance to get a bottle then, hopefully.
So you're anticipating it might sell out before it hits general store?
Yes.
Fantastic.
We might have a few bottles in with a couple of our favorite retails, a couple of our favorite retail partners. We might do, like super limited releases, and they'll pre-sell those limited releases as well. So I can't foresee there being a scenario in which you can walk into a shop and go, oh look, I'll have that.
Well, we're making it's going to be under 500 bottles. We don't know exactly how many it's going to be, but it's going to be less than 500 bottles. So it's going to be a small release. So yeah, they're not going to be hanging about.
Yeah, fantastic. That's a great position to be in.
You're listening to Whisky and Things.
Yeah, well, another thing you do, I'm interested in, is your cask share program. Tell us a bit about that. How do people get involved?
What? Shares in a cask?
Yeah, apparently so.
Go on.
So when we started the whiskey distillery, what normally happens when you set up a whiskey distillery is that you burn through a lot of cash very quickly. And one way of getting some of that cash back is to casks, to individuals as private casks, which they'll then, at the end of the maturation, they'll either bottle or sell back to the distillery for a profit. So we started looking at that as something that we were going to do. and decided that we really didn't want to be part of that. So we looked for other options, and there wasn't really any other options. The things that we didn't like about the private cask sales was that it was kind of like a bit elitist, not very accessible. So there were lots of people that were interested in whiskey, absolutely loved whiskey, that couldn't get anywhere near a private cask. Yeah. And the casks were being snapped up for investment purposes, which is no fun at all, really. So we'd already done a blockchain project for our launch where we set up crypto tokens and we sold them. And the deal was that you buy one of these tokens, you can send it back to us at any time in the future, and we'll give you a bottle of whatever you want. So a couple of people are going to have taken some really early stuff. A lot of people will take the first release. And I'm hoping that a good proportion of people will keep those tokens for the next 20 years and then rock up and just go, right, what's the most expensive thing you've got?
Nice.
And I think that'd be great. It'd be like a thank you for supporting us in those early days. Here's your bottle of 25-year-old whiskey.
Yeah, lovely. Yeah, that's a really... Yeah.
So we've done that.
Yeah, it'll be one of those mixed... your heart will be like, damn, lost some money. But actually, thank you, because exactly. You were there at the start and you got us off the ground. So it's one of those mixed blessings, isn't it? That's a lovely idea. I love that.
So we did that. And then we were thinking about our casks. And then we were like, we really want to get this cask whiskey into people's hands, into real people's hands, into whiskey enthusiasts' hands. So we decided that what we try and do is take a cask, divide it up into bottle-sized shares, and sell those to people at a reasonable price that people could afford. And the easiest way to do that and to keep track of everything that was going on, and again, to be open, was to do that via the blockchain. So we started off with this project and then realized that it was actually could be a lot bigger than just us. And we talked to our friends in the industry, and there was an appetite for it. So we did it as we spun it off as a separate business. We took on other partners with other expertise to get it off the ground. And we launched it last year with Circumstance, Macneen, McMira, Connacht in Ireland, and then we've been continually adding distilleries since then. And most of the cask shares are they're all unique. There's some great stuff that we've got in the pipeline coming from Circ Club in Germany. And a lot of them are extremely reasonable as well. I mean, our cask shares are 20 quid for one share, I think.
Yeah, I'm on that website now. This is called stillingcask.com, right?
Yeah, that's it.
Yeah, everything's super reasonable. And that will guarantee you a bottle from that cask. At cask strength. That
share is a bottle at cask strength, and there's just the thing to be aware of is there's a second payment. So with the prices you're looking at on the website, that guarantees you that bottle, and so you're paying for the liquid, right. and then when that gets bottled, and it tells you on the website when that's due to be bottled, and as soon as that gets bottled, you'll get another bill which will be for your excise duty, taxes and shipping. There's an estimate when you click through to buy. It'll show the estimate of how much that will be. Obviously, it has to be an estimate because shipping prices change, governments change, taxes and things. So we can't guarantee that estimate, but it's usually pretty close enough. So you pay your first bill. So in our case, a bottle of Circ, bottle of one of ours, the Marisotto, which is a heritage grain of barley, super exciting liquid. You get a cask share of that now for 20 quid, and you'll be given another bill when it's ready to be sent out to you, which will probably be around, I think 30 or 35 is the current estimate. So by the time you get it, you've paid essentially 55 quid for a rare limited release of a single bottle, single cask strength, single cask whiskey that nobody else could get their hands on, that you also got to jump on the journey with us. So we release video tasting updates with tasting notes of the liquid as the process goes along, so you can feel like you're involved in that process. And when you sit down for a dram of this in 5 years' time with friends, you can tell them that 5 years ago you bought a bit of it on the blockchain, and you jumped in with some technology and got involved in cask ownership, and you've been on that journey with that whiskey for as long as it's been alive. So it's a fun little way to play.
This is amazing. This is absolutely so cool. I'm a big fan of this. All right, I have a one perhaps negative question, and I'm sure it's probably on the FAQs. What happens if the cask fouls?
Yeah, so there's provision for that. And essentially, the distillery is obliged to replace that cask with something as close as possible. So,
right, okay.
Same age, essentially the barrel next to it in the distillery.
Yeah, right, okay. So,
so if it leaks or something happens to it,
it's on the distillery, not on you as the investor.
Oh God, yeah.
Okay.
There's a lot of peace of mind with that, isn't there? That's good.
Yeah.
What you want.
I know that was a really negative question. Straight from the back.
Do you know what? And the best questions to have in scenarios like this is negative questions, because the people at home that are listening,
negative questions,
and the ones that don't have negative questions, they're on there now clicking and buying amazing cask shares to drink some banging liquid in a few years' time. But the ones that are sat there going, oh wait, is that secure? And what we want for them is those negative questions that we can then give the actual answers to, that they can then feel confident in what they're buying, and then they're now sat pounding on their keyboards buying bottles too. So no, they're the questions we want.
Yeah, because we've spoke to people about cask investment before, which you're right is just ridiculously expensive. And when you invest in a cask, if it fails, it's on you. You lose your investment, and that's always the thing that makes you go, oh, you're spending that much money. Oh dear, I know you can get insurance or whatever, but still, that's crazy, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit murky, the old cask whiskey investment.
Yes, we've discovered this.
Yeah, and through Stilling Cask, you're buying directly from the distillery.
Yeah,
you're not buying it from us. We don't buy the cask. We just provide the mechanism that the distilleries can sell it to you. So you're not dealing with dodgy brokers or anything like that.
Amazing. All right. Okay. Well, I think I wish we'd done a whole episode just on this, Nick, and maybe we should at another point, because I think this is a really good idea that's worth exploring and letting people know about without it being hidden within another episode.
We've been 40 minutes into this one. Yeah, we do a proper one. Yeah.
So if you'd like to come talk to us about that at some point, that'd be great. All right. Okay. So let's wrap it up for now, but we're going to talk to you in about 3 seconds. But for anyone who wants to hear that, they can come and listen to that on Patreon. We'll talk about that later. Anyway, thanks so much for joining us for this episode as well. This has been such a fun interview, and I've really bought into this whiskey since sitting here talking to you and this product and this distillery. I'm so annoyed that I'm not in the club, if I'm brutally honest.
Get on the newsletter.
Yeah, I will. I'm going straight there right now. It's a great job.
You're listening to Whisky and Things.
So if you're a Patreon, you're able to watch the full uncut video of that interview on our Patreon page, which is patreon.com/Whisky and Things. And you'll also be able to watch the extra whiskey or nearly whiskey sample tasting that we did, neither of which we're about to score because Nick drank his, as we discussed earlier. But Nick, I think
that says it might score highly. So when we'll sort that out.
The thing is, Nick, as we discussed, we now don't need to have to do a podcast on the whiskey
we could just do the score.
To score it. We could just score it when we get a bottle, and it will get included. It have a little mark by it, but we will be linked back to this episode, which is fine.
Yeah, that's fine.
So at some point we will get round to that. Anyway, I do have so many other business, Nick. We had a lovely review.
Have you got any other business?
I do. We had a lovely review on iTunes this week from Derek JW ONG in Singapore, which actually explains why we've been in and out of the charts on Singapore. All down to this guy, I reckon. That makes me think there's also someone in Mauritius who is listening to us. If that's you, get in contact, please. Anyway, this
whiskey was Mauritius.
This review was 5 stars, and it says A++ podcast with informative knowledge sharing, deep tasting notes, and great comedy. Great job, lads. Cheers, Derek.
They're listening to us. Have they reviewed the right podcast there?
That doesn't matter. In my mind, it was a good review. And thank you, Derek, for that review. Thank you for taking the time out to give us a review. We actively encourage, we do it at the start of every episode, people give us reviews, just because we're delicate souls with egos, and it's nice for us. So if you do us a favour...
It's not about egos, just feelings. really. You know,
Yeah, 5 stars on whatever podcast platform or whatever star rating you want to give us, actually. But obviously, we'd prefer 5. You can do it on Spotify. You can do it on iTunes. Please help us out. Anyway, that's my in and out of business. It was a plea.
It will help our algorithm.
Yes, it will do.
I don't know how it works.
Anyway, Nick, I think the Angels have had their share.
Absolutely. You've got to give the Angels their share. I think we discussed that today. Otherwise, you know, they. I don't. Yeah,
it's not as good whiskey. It's not as good for the whiskey. It's not good for the drink, mate. It's not good as discussed.
Yes.
Angels have got to have their share. Anyway,
back. Right, let's get out of there.
Cheers,
everyone. Thanks for coming. Whisky and Things has been brought to you